From the low chances of him making a comeback after his injury, to him possibly moving on from tennis in the future, here's why Rafael Nadal needs to just admit that he's already retired. Starting with the low chances of him making a comeback after his injury. At a press conference in Mallorca recently, Nadal talked about his plans and his decision to skip the French Open in 2023 and Wimbledon in July 2023. Not only did he miss the Open, but he also admitted that he was planning to stop playing for a long time. It had all started with a hip injury in January that just wasn't getting any better. The 14-time French Open winner also said that his plan was to play one more tour in 2024 if his body let him, and then he'd stop at the end of that year. Now, I don't know about you, but that definitely sounded like he wasn't sure how long he wanted to keep playing tennis before he retired. He did say that he wanted to take a long break and, if all goes well, come back to play in the Olympics next year. But even that's still uncertain because it depends on how well he gets better. And when you think about how tough things are, with his time off, Nadal will definitely drop out of the top 100 ATP rankings in the world, where he's been for the last 20 years. It's pretty much over for him. Just look at how he even fell out of the top 10 in March 2023. At the 2023 Australian Open, Nadal was the defending champion, but Mackenzie McDonald beat him in straight sets in the second round. During the game, that same hip injury was a big problem, and he was treated for it the whole time. Nadal officially pulled out of the Indian Wells and Miami Masters tournaments at the end of February, so he could heal. That's when he fell out of the top 10, for the first time since 2005. This was the end of the longest run in the top 10 in the history of the ATP rankings. The organizers of the 2023 Monte Carlo Masters said that Nadal wanted to come back despite his injury, but he pulled out in April. Later, he also decided not to play in the French Open, so he basically missed the whole clay court season. Rafael Nadal had a very interesting and up-and-down year in 2022, both mentally and physically. The first half was pretty good. Many people had wondered if the great champion's career was coming to an end after a foot injury had cut short his 2021 season. But at the ATP 250 Melbourne Somerset on January 6th, Nadal made a good return to the tour. He reached the final by defeating Emil Rossavori and won his 89th tour-level title by beating Maxime Cressy. It was a significant victory for Nadal, as it was his first win on a hard court in almost 2 years. The Australian Open brought more success for the guy as he continued his winning streak. He secured his spot in the final against Daniil Medvedev. Despite being down 2 sets, Nadal showed incredible resilience and determination to mount a comeback and win the match after more than 5 hours on the court. After Djokovic, he became the second man in the Open era to win the double career Grand Slam. The star's winning streak continued as he triumphed at the Mexican Open without dropping a set. But his journey faced a setback at Indian Wells due to stomach problems. Despite the challenges, he managed to come out on top against tough opponents like Nick Kyrgios and Carlos Alcaraz until Taylor Fritz defeated him, handing him his first loss of 2022. The tennis superstar was clearly injured and couldn't keep up with the 24-year-old. He later said that in his semi-final match with Alcaraz, he had broken a rib. Everyone was left wondering when they'd see the 35-year-old player back on the court. As far as the clay court season was concerned, there were uncertainties about his performance, particularly on his beloved surface. He returned to the ATP Tour at the Madrid Masters and had a thrilling match against David Goffin, where he fought off 4 match points to secure a victory. It was an intense match. Goffin made the match go to a third set when Nadal had 2 match points in the second set, one of which was on his serve. Nadal didn't win, and the match went to a third set. The set ended in a tiebreak, which was one of the most exciting things you'll probably ever see. He fought off 4 match points to win the game 11-9 and escape in the capital of his country. But he couldn't overcome Carlos Alcaraz in the quarterfinals, which ended his hopes of winning a clay title before the French Open. The 9th-ranked 19-year-old from Miami, who had just won the Masters 1000, was ready to take on his hero and easily came out on top. So far, Rafael Nadal had a record of 22 wins and 2 losses. Then he went to Rome with the goal of winning at least 1 clay title before the French Open. After winning 1 game, he was then defeated in the second game. Another injury had shown up. This time, the problem with his left foot had come back. He lost to the Canadian because he couldn't play at his best. This was only the second time since 2005 that he went into the French Open without a clay title. The last time this happened was when COVID messed up the 2020 season. Despite the uncertainties, Rafael Nadal proved his prowess at the French Open, a tournament he's dominated throughout his career. What started as a great match against Alexander Zverev in the semifinals ended in a messy way. It took more than 3 hours and a rough match to get to a second-set tiebreak. But the contest stopped there because the German hurt his ankle very badly, which ended his run in Paris. He battled through tough matches against Felix Auger-Aliassime and Novak Djokovic, ultimately reaching the final. Facing Casper Ruud, Nadal secured his 14th Roland Garros title and broke the record for the most slam singles titles with his 22nd win. He'd looked up to the Spaniard since he was a child, and the Norwegian seemed to be too shocked by the event. Nadal won easily with scores of 6-3, 6-3, and 6-0. It was his 14th Roland Garros win and 22nd Slam singles title, which broke the record. Soon after, the Spaniard talked about how far he had to go to fight with his injured foot. He had played the game with what he called a zombie foot, by giving himself painkillers through injections. Back then, things were looking great for him, and there was no sign of him retiring anytime soon. In fact, Mats Wilander, the 7-time Grand Slam winner, even said that. "We are witnessing sports history with Rafa. We thought it before, and even more so now." Then, he had a mixed season on grass courts. Nadal made it to the semifinals of Wimbledon 2022, but a tear in his abdomen forced him to drop out. That was the end of his career in the long run. At the time, though, it ended his hopes of getting the calendar slam and made it possible for Nick Kyrgios to get to his first slam final. At the Cincinnati Masters, Nadal's first match back after a 6-week break didn't go as planned. He lost to Borna Coric, but he came back strong at the US Open and made it to the 4th round. Before Francis Tiafoe beat him at the 2022 French Open, Nadal had never lost at a Grand Slam. Even in the past few months, the tennis champion has seemed like a ghost of his former self. And if you look at his longtime rival and friend, Roger Federer's retirement recently, it might be time for Nadal to let go of the court too. When Federer retired, it had a huge impact on Nadal, mainly because they'd seen the highs and lows of the tennis world together. Nadal, Novak Djokovic, and Federer had been the big three of the tennis world, and with one gone, it didn't seem like the others would last long either. He even admitted that Roger leaving the tour meant an important part of his life was gone, because Federer had been there for important moments of his tennis career. The last match that they played together was extremely emotional for Rafael for the same reason. It's not just about Federer retiring though, it's also about Nadal moving on from tennis. Just look at how he didn't play in any tournaments, while he and his wife were waiting for the birth of their first kid. He should choose to spend more time with his family instead of going back to tennis, because his coach asked him to play right after the birth of his son. He's been at the top for a long time now. Sure, he's made it back after an injury many times throughout his career, but this time it may be too late to return. So from him moving on from the sport to the low chances of him making a comeback after his injury, that's all for why Rafael Nadal needs to just admit that he's already retired.